Okay, so welcome everybody to um, this session. So this session will be looking at conflict management, and I mean, when we hear the word conflict, it rings a lot of bells, but it's a very, very serious topic and very sensitive. And if you're not very careful, you might actually find yourself in a very pathetic situation with the stakeholders if you don't really know how to manage conflicts that happen during ERP implementations. So conflict between you and your team, and conflict also between you and the other stakeholders. So it's important to learn this topic so that you know how to behave and how to respond when in cases of conflict. So of course you can see a picture of this guy trying to separate two people who are ready to get down with themselves. So the next thing is, what is conflict management? Anybody has an idea? I'd love your thoughts. When you hear conflict and management, what comes to your mind? 2 minutes.
All that comes to mind is a disagreement in management, maybe during work process and everything. Yeah.
Not really. It's really about there is conflict. How do you manage it? That's conflict management. So it's basically how you manage conflicts. Now, conflict management, sorry, John, I've already passed that. Conflict management is techniques. Is a set of techniques required to identify and resolve conflict in the workplace. So, first thing is identify, and second is resolve. So you might actually be involved in conflict without even knowing that it's getting to a state of conflict. I've seen a lot of conflict during ERP implementation projects, a lot, you know. So it's one thing to know that it's a natural thing. And once there is misunderstanding, once there is disrespect, once there are certain traits, definitely this conflict will spring up. Now, since conflict is a normal part of any work environment, you find it anywhere, even in church, in your house, in the office, everywhere. Conflict management goal is to detect and minimize the negative effects of conflict rather than eliminating it completely. So you might not be able to eliminate conflict completely, but you can manage it with the right mindset and with the right set of communication. For example, um, how we communicate, it's one of the reasons why there are a lot of conflicts. Just this morning, John wrote in the chat group that the link is not working. That's not the right approach because that's like a direct confirmation. So sometimes the way you communicate can lead to conflict when you don't manage your words. And it's very, very important because words count when you are in an ERP project. The way you talk to your team members, the way you talk to the stakeholders, outside talking, the way you act. So these are all. So the essence of this course is basically to look at how to minimize the negative effects because conflict has effects when it happens. And conflict management is used to handle conflicts with fairness and efficiency. So if you're the one in the middle and trying to resolve conflicts, you have to make sure you are fair. And most times the BA is actually in the middle, or most times BA is also involved. In doing so, you can avoid poor communication between colleagues, decrease workplace tension to improve productivity, and also keep the morale of employees high. So, in handling conflict with fairness and efficiency, you can avoid poor communication. So, like I said, one of the reasons for conflict is the way we communicate. Decrease workplace tension because conflict actually creates tension. And of course, keep the morale of employees high. Very, very important. So be sure that you find yourself in a state of conflict in a work environment as you have actually been involved in your home. It's just how you manage it that counts or matters. What are the areas through which conflict may arise in an IT project? So you have been, for some of us, have been on different, it might not necessarily be IT, it might be a family project, it might be a technology project in your office, it might be anything. So what are the areas through which conflict may arise? Any response? Does anybody want to share? What's the source of conflicts? Where are the areas through which conflict may arise? Can I unmute and speak? Okay, so I'll move on since we don't have any response.
Raise my hand.
No,
Please, can you come again with the question, please?
who has his hand raised up? The
I
question
have,
is,
I have my hand raised up.
okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, where conflict can actually rise, potential areas are where lack of understanding or lack of proper communication in terms of
Okay.
yes of beats or deadlines or achieve expectations. When they are not properly communicated to team members, definitely conflict can come in, and you pass the message to somebody or to a team member or team members, and they don't understand what you have said or what you have communicated to them, and you are expecting what's this. At the end of the day, that can lead to conflict amongst the teams.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any other person? Okay, so we'll move. Right. So types of conflicts in, well, whether SAP, whether ERP, the types of conflicts. So based on these aspects, there can arise different conflicts, such as number one, project conflicts. Sorry, I think that's my bad. Project conflicts can arise between multiple stakeholders in a project. The reason can be anything. Opposing ideas can cause conflict. Project stress can cause conflict. Unforeseen requirements can cause conflict. Budgetary constraints can cause conflict. Lack of commitment or personal ego clashes can cause conflict. Everything that has been said here is absolutely correct, especially the lack of commitment bit and personal ego. Yeah. So when we are saying when you are not committed to the team or committed to the project, it can cause conflict. When you have an opposing idea that maybe was not considered or you think is superior, might cause, so many things can cause conflict. The way somebody talks to you might cause conflict. So these are some of the issues that can cause conflict in a project. Now, based on these aspects, there can arise different conflicts, such as conflict due to unclear tax expectation, just like Masaru said, or John, conflicts due to unclear tax expectations. So when you give people tasks and they are not clear around about what they should do, and instead of them to come back and communicate and say, please, can you clarify this? They won't do that. They'll wait until the day and they say, sorry, I didn't understand you. That's how do you expect the person to feel? So that can actually lead to conflict. Example one, where is that? Conflict due to unclear expectation, lack of communication can cause conflict. So if you want to manage conflict, you have to make sure you are communicating. Varied working styles. So this is also an issue. Some people like working alone. Some like working with teams. Some people have their own style of working. They, different people with different, strokes or different ways of working. So different ways of working or styles of working can cause conflict because it might be hurting the other person. Conflicts over budget. So of course, this is a top management issue where a certain budget has been set out for a certain project, but some misunderstanding around what this budget can cover, what this budget cannot cover can cause conflict. Then conflict arising out of project scope creep. So this can be a conflict between myself and, for example, just the Greenfield team. If there are things they are expecting and I think is going to be out of scope, that can cause a conflict. So I hope now you have understood that conflict can happen when you're involved in a project. It's really about how to manage this conflict that matters. So how do you manage conflict in an IT project? So we have how you manage, and I want you to put this in your brain or memorize this or engrave it because it will help you when you understand this very important conflict management strategy. So you see here on my far right, you have high. That's conflict. If you compare the conflict as a result in terms of the importance of the goal and importance of relationship. So we have goal of the business or goal of the project and relationship. So the ones that are my far end here, these two is, you can see high. These two are high because so if you check, in terms of importance to a project, collaborating and competing is high. In terms of importance to a project, in terms of importance to relationship, avoiding is low, accommodating is high. So what does this mean? It means that when you have conflict, there are different ways you can manage the conflict. One is to avoid. And if you choose to avoid, in the scale of things, in terms of importance to goal and in terms of importance to relationship, avoiding is low. So what happens? You're in a conflict with a colleague, or you're in conflict with a spouse, and you don't want to talk about it, you just avoid it because you don't want problem. So that's, in terms of conflict management, that's a low way of managing conflict. That's a very low way. Now, in terms of importance to goal and importance to relationship, accommodating is high, in the sense that one of the ways you can manage conflict is to accommodate others. The next, in terms of importance to relationship and importance to goal, competing is low for these two. But if you check it as per, importance to goal is high. Competing is a way of managing conflict, but it creates tension. Collaborating is also a way of managing conflict. It's actually, in terms of importance to relationship, is quite high, in the sense that when you collaborate, you create more relationships with people. It also supports the goal of the organization. But at the middle of all this is compromise. So the best way to actually manage conflict is compromise. Let's see how this works. So what is compromise basically? Compromise is understanding, is listening, and is considering others. So if you want to manage conflict in your workplace, in your home, in offices, you have to be in the middle. You have to make sure you're willing and able to compromise your position, because everybody has an idea, or everybody has their own rights. But the person who is willing to compromise is actually ends the day. That's a good attitude. So learn from today that the best way to sit when you are involved in a conflict is to be in a compromising position, in the sense that you're willing to let go of some things and accept some things, or you're willing to listen to others and put yourself in their position. Yeah. So accommodating is good, but it depends now on what you are accommodating. Collaborating is good and high, but it also has its issues. Competing and avoiding are two things we should avoid totally. You don't need to compete, you don't need to avoid. You have to accommodate, you have to collaborate, but most importantly, some conflict will lead to compromise, and you need to be willing to do that. So 7 conflict resolution strategies. First thing, if you know the root cause of a conflict, consider half of the battle won. So first thing is to stay in the middle, like we're saying, in the side of compromise. But if you can get to the root cause of the conflict, then you are actually very close to resolving it. The success of the other half depends on how you resolve this conflict. So first is to understand the root cause of the conflict. So for example, you're having an issue with a colleague. So the question is, if you use the principle of the 5 whys, you should actually get to the root cause. Why is this person having issues with me? Why? Ask yourself why 5 times. You probably get to the root of why he has issues with you. It might not be a problem. It might also be a problem he has. So how do you resolve conflicts? Since you know the root cause, what other things do you do? You have to set guidelines, right? You have to set guidelines in terms of a clear path towards resolving that conflict. 2 is active listening. So one way you can manage conflict is when you listen more than you speak, right? Just be at the mood of listening. Because most times conflicts happen when 2 people don't want to listen and everybody wants to talk, in terms everybody feels that they are correct. Nobody really wants to listen. So one of the ways is active listening. 2 is avoid force and intimidation. So another way to resolve conflict is to avoid the use of force and intimidation to suppress the other person. You might have succeeded in doing that, but you have not actually solved any problem. Embrace conflict and learn from them. So especially when you're in a different environment, when you move to a different country, just expect that conflicts will happen when you have a relationship with other people. To learn to embrace conflict, even in our home, it's a part of life. It's something that's been there for decades since man was made or created. So learn to embrace it and make sure at the end of the day you learn, and that will help you become smarter next time. Use the power of compromise. It's very, very important. It's a very powerful tool that if you understand very well, it can help you overcome or resolve conflicts. So you have to always remember about the goal. If the goal is not in your mind, if your personal ego is in your mind, then you might not be willing to compromise. But if the goal is in your mind, then for the sake of the goal, you might have to shift your position sometimes to accommodate other people's requests. So it's not every time. Sometimes you might have to be strict and stand on your right. Sometimes you might have to embrace. Sometimes you might have to accommodate. But compromise is is the top in the list of tools you have at your possession to resolve conflict. Then constructive criticism is one way you can resolve, making sure you're able to accept constructive criticism. You're not somebody who can be cautioned or who can be criticized, then you have issues with conflict, because when you are working on other people and you don't do things the right way, they will criticize you, or your colleague might criticize you, and just accept that people will criticize you. but be willing to accept the ones that are constructive so that you can change and be better and learn from it also. Then one of the ways, if there's a conflict that two of you cannot resolve, then you have to get a third party that understands, really has experience and understands what you guys are going through. So you might need to appoint a mediator at some point. So it might be, if you're in a team and you and a team member is having conflict, you might need to want to discuss that with your manager. For example, in one of my projects, I had a disagreement with a team member about a task that he wanted me to do, right? I felt that was outside my scope. I felt he was the one supposed to handle it. He said it's me that was supposed to handle it. So, and if we stay on that place and never compromise, then the project will suffer. So I think what we did was, my approach was to reach out to my MD, to my manager, and ask, what does he think? This is the feedback I'm getting. He said, no, I was not supposed to be the one doing it. That I should not worry. I should let it go. That he was going to discuss with my other colleague. And I think when he discussed, my colleague understood what was needed. He did it. We reconciled, and that matter went back. So most times, if it's something that will impact on the goal, you might want to escalate. But make sure you have discussed the issue with the person. Make sure you understand clearly his position, and you understand your position before you make set any kind of mediator. Okay, so this is where we're going to end for today. In the next week, we're going to be looking at issue management, which is like conflict, but issues are remember, we have RAID log where we're managing risk. So when a risk occurs, so if we have said, for example, project budget is a risk, and finally we have started overshooting the project, it's now an issue. So how do we manage issues that arise in project, even as we try to monitor and track the RAID log? How do we manage issues that can arise from projects? So that's what we're going to be picking next week. So any questions at this point? If there are no questions, we'll have to go off and prepare for the next session. Any questions? Okay, so no questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I think we're going to look at the next session.